I hope you're ready to enter the flow because there will be a great flooding of the water element from the middle of October through the middle of December in 2025. This creative, imaginative flow of the water element will involve a grand water trine. Now, this Grand Water Trine isn't going to change everything. It isn't going to make everything much easier or better, but there has been so much incredible change that has already taken place in 2025. And we know in 2026, there is even more monumental, fast moving changes on the way. And so, this grand water trine from October through December this year is really important to pay attention to and take advantage of for the creativity, the imagination, the intuition, and the ability to find your center amidst all of this great change, readjust to what has already been happening, and envision and strategize the solutions, the growth, the restoration, the recovery, whatever it is that you need to go through right now as part of your process unfolding in your life. Hey, I'm Greg Crawford. I'm a professional astrologer, and my books are open for November if you'd like to get a reading with me. But in this video today, I want to talk about this Grand Water Trine and the great opportunities it can bring for all of us. Partially, this is because the trine aspect in astrology is known as the most positive and the most stable. That doesn't mean in natal charts, people that have trine aspects, everything goes well for them, or that it always leads to better outcomes, whether that's in natal charts or whether that is in transiting astrology aspects that we're all collectively experiencing. Let's face it, the world is systematically collapsing and falling apart in so many ways right now. But as individuals within these incredible collective changes that were set off even more recently by these very powerful eclipses that opposed Saturn and Neptune, this grand water trine is involving Saturn and Neptune, and it will bring ways of using your intuition, using your inner knowing, using your capacity to look at the world and imagine something different and strategize how to make your way there. Water doesn't move fast, but it does flow. And water always seeks the path of least resistance. Water element people sometimes get labeled as people that move a little bit slower. People wonder, are you ever going to act? Are you ever going to get moving? And we've had Saturn in Pisces slowing things down even more. Saturn in Pisces can definitely build things imaginatively and creatively, help things take form. But Saturn also always can slow things down, bring some adversity, bring some obstacles, even blocks to the water element, and specifically in this case, to Pisces. But now something about the meaning of Saturn in Pisces, which we've been experiencing all the way back since 2023, is being unlocked. And that key unlocking the depth and the creative potency available through working with Saturn and Pisces is going to be coming through Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is the Lord of Pisces. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. And Jupiter in Cancer is going to be moving into a very close, almost perfect trine aspect with Saturn in Pisces over the course of October and November and into December. At the same time, Neptune will be leaving Aries and coming back to Pisces on October 22nd. So we're going to get Neptune and Saturn back in the sign of Pisces again. We've all been adjusting to this incredible change that's been overwhelming, difficult for many, just something new to get adjusted to with Neptune being in Aries since the end of March, plus Saturn then came into Aries at the end of May. We got the Saturn Neptune almost conjunction happening in Aries in recent months. Now they're both going to be coming back into Pisces. And it's not like things are going back to the way they were before. If you're like me, your life has completely changed. There's whole new cycles opening up. And yet, because they are coming back to Pisces into this internal watery sign and element of interconnectivity, there is all sorts of depths to explore within ourselves, allowing things to condense and tending that cauldron or vessel that you have in your life to hold this water element. If you don't already have some type of vessel to hold this solution that will be forming over the course of the months ahead, this is a good time to create a structure, create a space to hold the dissolution of the water element that will be taking place. Water does dissolve things. It, as Pliny the Elder most anciently said, water devours, it dissolves earth. It also quenches flames. And it also rises above into the form of clouds and claims the heavens themselves, and then descends in the form of rain, bringing fertility, bringing growth. And so this water element coming can be very fertile and seed the growth that will be coming. But we're also dealing with loss and the need to let go. But Jupiter exalted in Cancer, in trine with Saturn and Neptune, because Jupiter is that Lord of Pisces, there is going to be ways of finding hope, finding the silver lining in whatever adversity you have been facing, and envisioning using that water element that has that incredible interconnectivity to blend and mix all sorts of influences together. And also using that strategy of the water element. Water element people are actually incredibly strategic. I think it sometimes might be an aspect of the water signs that gets overlooked. Oftentimes in popular astrology, you see water sign people being characterized as overly emotional and empathetic and compassionate. But water is actually a cold sign, and water sign people can be pretty cold in their ability to strategize. And that's because water does move slow. It can be cautious. It really takes things in. And water takes in aspects of reality that the other elements don't pick up. Water really soaks in the emotional undercurrents, the psychic undercurrents. And remember, it's always looking for that path of least resistance. And so all of us, as this water trine forms in the months ahead, can take our time to go within and strategize and figure out the best route forward. And so, why is a trine aspect considered to be so positive? Well, in the foundational system of astrology, which is very much based upon that ancient Thema Mundi chart of the universe or chart of the world soul, or you could even say chart of God. It's a Cancer rising chart with the moon having her domicile in that first house of Cancer, Jupiter being also exalted in that first house of Cancer. The second house is Leo, where we have the sun. And the two lights, then, the moon in Cancer and the sun in Leo, are rising up in this chart. And the two signs that form trines to Cancer and Leo involve signs of Jupiter. So Pisces, the watery home, the nocturnal home of Jupiter, forms a flowing trine to Cancer. And Sagittarius, the fiery diurnal home of Jupiter, forms a flowing trine to Leo. And so the home of the sun, Leo, has a trine with the home of Jupiter, and the watery home of the moon has a trine aspect with the watery home of Jupiter. And so Jupiter, which is considered traditionally the most benefic planet, a planet that really stabilizes, can really bring growth, can bring freedom from bondage and restraints, becomes associated with the trine aspect. When we have exact trines forming, they're always going to involve planets in the same element. So we could have a fire trine of a lot of fast moving movement and inspiration, or an air trine of a lot of free flowing ideas and communication, or an earth trine of incredible ability to organize and structure and practically build things and bring things into form and shape them. Or we could have, like we are about to experience, a water trine. And so, one of the things that's so important about this water trine is thinking about the element of water. Like I've already mentioned, one of the key things about water is its interconnectivity and its flow, its ability to flow, find that path of least resistance, as well as enable this interconnectivity of mixing together all these different ideas and synthesizing all these things together, being open to lots of influences, taking in the psychic, emotional undercurrents and dynamics of things going on all around the water element sign, and taking that into flow states of creative expression. When we get into that flow state, we allow things to move through us, and that creative process opens up to what's available in that moment. And the water element really can excel at this, as well as envision a path ahead to help calculate and consider and observe and take in to account everything going on. And then once the water element knows where to go, it can actually move incredibly fast. So water sign people sometimes looks like they're just really taking their time. They don't seem to be really moving, and all of a sudden they are gone, fast moving, like rapid currents, and they make things happen really fast. This is something that we will be able to experience with this Grand Water Trine coming, especially this first section of it, because it's going to involve Mars in Scorpio. Mars excels at creating movement, prodding things into action and getting things going. And so we can count on, especially during the second half of October, some real movement getting going with this water trine. Now, another thing about the water element is its incredible intuition and inner knowing that is all part of that process of being able to consider what's going on and finding that path of least resistance. Water is an internally directed sign that opens up the unconscious, that opens up the imagination, that ability to imagine something different and figure out how to make it happen, bring it into being, bring those inner dreams into reality. And so doing practices, whatever that is for you. It's always a little bit different from person to person, but whatever helps you connect to that inner life, whatever helps you explore your own inner landscape, whether that's tracking dreams at night through a dream journal, or having a writing process, or getting into more body practices, or meditation, or something else. Whatever it is, tracking that internal life is going to be so important, and using that inner awareness and intuition to help guide you. Water logic is not the normal type of logic. In fact, sometimes you could say it appears to be illogical, but this intuitive ability of the water signs is something that's real. Sometimes it appears to be psychic. It's some sort of intuitive inner hunch. It's hard to explain. It's hard to put into words. Water element people often struggle to put their impressions into words, or when they do, they're especially adept at making this poetic or into some creative soundscape or storytelling ability. But in the end, listening to that intuition is going to be incredibly important. Now, another thing about the water element is compassion. water signs, they will act out of their own self-interest, absolutely. But oftentimes, water element people get especially motivated by the compassion for others. And so they will take charge or become more ambitious because, for example, they might have a partner or children or a family or friends or a larger community that they want to act on behalf of, whether that's through supporting them or protecting them. And so that compassion of the water element that can pick up the emotions of what's going on and then take action on behalf of whatever is most important to them, whether that is their family or local community or shared alliances with other people. This is going to be another important aspect of this grand water trine we're going to be experiencing. And because we're talking about the water element, and because we're talking about a grand water trine involving 3 points, this is the other thing about why the trine aspect has this reputation for being so positive. And really, more than positive, it's probably best just to say this is a very freely flowing aspect that can really help things take shape into form, have ideas come into reality and take form. And this is because, on one hand, right, they're all in the same element, but they're each in a different modality. So it's always going to involve a cardinal sign. So in this case, in the water element, the cardinal sign that initiates, that gets things moving is Cancer. And this is where we have Jupiter exalted in Cancer. And so Jupiter exalted in Cancer is going to be that visioning element of getting things in this process started up and moving. And I really see Jupiter in Cancer in this role, not just starting things up from scratch. It's very much in the process of recovering from or restoring or taking the next step forward on whatever incredible process of change or adversity you have had to go through so far this year, including these recent eclipses. But Jupiter in Cancer has that hope, has that vision to get something going to be helpful, not just for yourself, but also for loved ones, community, and so on. Then we always have, besides the trine, having something that will start things up, get things moving, we have that fixed sign, in this case, Scorpio. Scorpio in the water trinity has that role of sustaining the action, maturing the action, taking the long range plan, bringing things to completion. Scorpios, as you may know, are especially adept at doing all of this research, taking into all these different considerations and figuring out these long-term plans and actually following through and making them happen. We're going to have 3 different planets coming into this role in Scorpio. As we'll talk about, Mercury in Scorpio is going to have the longest extended stay, but we will also have Mars in Scorpio. So we will have a Mercury-Mars combination in Scorpio. Then we will have a Venus and Mercury combination in Scorpio. And then we'll have another role of Mercury to play at the end in December of just Mercury alone in Scorpio. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we also have the mutable part of the Trinity, which in this case is Pisces. The mutable signs come at the end of the seasons. They are involved in transitions, taking us from the known to the unknown, bridging things together. And they also excel at flexibly adapting to whatever is going on. In Pisces, of course, we have Saturn in Pisces, and we will soon have Neptune back in Pisces beginning on October 22nd. So let's get a little bit more into this dynamic. I'm recording this on October 16th, just as Mercury in Scorpio is approaching a conjunction with Mars in Scorpio. And while we could say this grand water trine has already been in effect for a little bit at this point. I really see this whole process intensifying and really starting to take shape once we come into this conjunction between Mercury and Mars on October 19th. They are going to come together at 19 to 20 degrees of Scorpio. And at that point, we'll be just about 5 degrees away from a trine with Jupiter and 7 degrees away from a trine with Saturn, very much in orb of all of this taking shape. And so this Mars Mercury conjunction is really going to initiate us into the meaning of this grand water trine. But if you notice on this chart, we have Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Cancer, Mercury, Mars in Scorpio, but Neptune is still in Aries, right at that 0 degree point of Aries. And so the Grand Water Trine will become much more intense and even more significant when Neptune re enters Pisces on October 22nd. Now, one thing that you may notice between these two charts is in that last chart I showed on October 19th, the moon is waning in Libra, moving in between a conjunction with Venus and the sun, which means we're about to have a new moon in Libra. We will then have a new moon in Libra a couple of days later. And then on October 22nd, which will be about a day after the new moon in Libra, Neptune will come back into Pisces and we will get this grand water trine taking effect with the moon in Scorpio. And so we're going to have this new moon, this whole new lunar cycle involving the moon moving into Scorpio and then passing over Mars and Mercury. And so we are really not only being powerfully initiated into this grand water trine by Mars and Mercury coming together, by Neptune coming back to Pisces for the final time in our lifetimes, but also even by a new lunar cycle coming in and pulling us into this water trine energy even more so. And so one thing to think about with this are what are the key players? As I mentioned, Mercury will be in Scorpio the entire time. Part of it will be Mercury and Mars together in Scorpio. Another part will involve Mercury and Venus in Scorpio, and then it will just be Mercury in Scorpio. Even more important, though, is the fact that during this process, Mercury will station retrograde on November 9th and then form a conjunction with the sun, be reborn and reanimated on November 20th, and then will ultimately station direct on November 29th. And so we will have an entire Mercury retrograde process unfold during this time period of the Grand Water Trine. Now, when Mercury does station retrograde on November 9th, Mercury will actually be in Sagittarius. So there's going to be a little bit of a stretch of time there from the end of October until mid-November, November 18th, where Mercury will be in Sagittarius and not in Scorpio. But this is one of the things to keep in mind here, because on one hand, we have the combination of Mercury and Scorpio in this water trine with Jupiter in Cancer, Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, but there are going to be three distinct phases of Mercury combining here. So before we look at that, let's just think a little bit more about what does it mean for Mercury in Scorpio to be in a water trine with Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Well, as I talked about a little bit already, the Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune piece are part of much larger collective cycles. The Saturn Neptune cycle in particular is hugely important. It's part of all the massive changes going on all around the world and our sense of consensus reality shifting and changing. And now that Saturn and Neptune are back in Pisces, there's going to be even more of a dissolution taking place of what was, as well as a re-emergence or an emergence of whatever sense of new direction especially from that inner realm of intuition and imagination within you, can be taking shape. There can be great disillusionment. It can feel like a great dream is ending, but we can also feel this birth of new dreams and what we want to bring into reality. So that's all taking place in Pisces, but we also then have Jupiter with the Saturn Neptune combination. And Jupiter and Saturn, especially, are important to think about here because they are part of all these big collective cycles in civilization and culture. And in our personal lives, they also go with these much larger scale plans. Like, let's say you want to buy a house or build a house or cultivate the land around you or help others cultivate land or create a new business or some sort of new enterprise or some sort of major long-term project. Jupiter and Saturn are really excellent at these types of things. And so, with them coming together in this trine, especially with Saturn in Pisces in the sign of Jupiter, there is going to be this ability to look at how things are changing, how things are collapsing, and think about what do you want to build? What kind of foundations do you want to start laying and setting for yourself at this time to benefit not just yourself, but your broader community? Saturn is that skeletal system, that structure that doesn't really allow Jupiter to just expand and grow at no cost. If Jupiter gets too excessive, Saturn will cut Jupiter down. Saturn holds that skeletal structural system that Jupiter can expand within. And so, with Jupiter exalted in Cancer and Saturn in the sign of Jupiter, we will have the opportunity to expand and grow and envision new possibilities, but we're also going to have to deal with Saturn and Neptune and Pisces together, and that's going to involve intensification of what has to be released and shed and emptied at the same time. And so we're going to have to pay attention to, very much like in the northern hemisphere, we will be experiencing the fall season heading towards winter and the leaves falling off the trees and so forth. That composting, that reseeding of vision will be very much taking shape. Now, at the same time, here comes Mercury in Scorpio. So if we think about Mercury combining with these, one thing that becomes pretty obvious would be learning, studying. This could be an incredibly powerful time to take on learning projects, passive studies, enrolling in courses, enrolling in mentorships, or if you yourself are somebody that is a teacher or a speaker or a writer, getting writing projects going, creating new classes, creating events, creating speaking opportunities, getting messages out there. We can also think about this very much, especially for those of you that are watching us, because it probably means you're already into astrology, divination, the occult, esoteric subjects. This combination, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, you really can't get better for perfecting, developing your craft, studying astrology, studying divination, gaining greater skills, greater experience in astrology, divination, any type of esoteric, magic, occult field, ancient studies, especially because we're bringing in Saturn, timeless, ancient studies because we're bringing in Neptune with Saturn and Mercury and Jupiter. Now, because though Mercury's going to go retrograde, we can think about this ending part of October, October 22nd to the 29th, when Mercury is direct with Mars also there. This is going to be some sort of initiation, movement into what we are feeling, what we are intuitively guided towards these new directions are. But keep in mind the fact that Mercury will go retrograde and then Mercury will come back into Scorpio around November 18th. We're then going to have a very powerful new moon in Scorpio happen just around that same time. And then Mercury will move back to eventually station direct on November 29th. When Mercury does this, Venus will also be there. This process could very much involve both a letting go and a shedding and a dissolution and more of a release of what really has to go that we haven't fully let go of with all of this great change, as well as a reorientation to this new vision. There's going to probably be a need to make adjustments, redesigns. We're going to have Venus as part of this, so it can be very creative. I think it's going to ultimately be a helpful process. But Mercury, because Mercury will be going retrograde, we might in some cases have to loop back around to rework some of these things coming in at the end of October, and there's more adjustments that are going to be needed with them. Then, once Mercury goes direct on November 29th and moves through Scorpio up until December 11th, this is going to be the time to fully have things locked in, focused, and moving forward with whatever new life, new ideas comes out of this process. What we're going to experience first is not just Mercury in Scorpio, it's going to be Mars and Mercury in Scorpio. This is already happening right now as I'm speaking, but as I mentioned, once Mercury and Mars come together on October 19th, it'll be even more powerful, and then it'll be even more powerful once Neptune comes into Pisces on October 22nd. So there's going to be a week of October 22nd until October 29th in which we will have Mars and Mercury together in Scorpio. Now, we're bringing Mars into this mix now to consider. And this is especially powerful because, of course, Mars' home is in Scorpio. So we have Mars in domicile, able to fully express that martial force. And Mars also loves being in a water sign. Mars is one of the triplicity elemental water element lords of the water sign. And so Mars here has a lot of power. And what does Mars do? Mars divides. Mars separates. There's sort of a big bang explosion with Mars in which something divides. Especially with the water element, I mentioned, water can be very interconnective, consider all these different possibilities and potentials. But in reality, we can't have all of the potential. We actually have to make a choice. We have to make a decision. And something out of all the possibility and potential of what could happen will happen. And so Mars is part of that. Mars brings things, pushes things, prods things, gets things moving into being, and something takes form out of all of that potential, which means everything else that could be potential has to die and be gone and let go of, because this is now what is happening. And because the water element is slow, and because we have Saturn in Pisces, which could be causing some delays and blocks, I do think Mars here is going to be really helpful for getting things moving. Now, when we also look at this combination of things, this really brings in a lot in terms of leadership, taking command, taking courage, taking authority over your life and direction, and really resiliently persevering through whatever challenges you have to face with whatever's going on at this time. But I think there is a lot of really helpful potential that can come out of this. But it's going to involve, in many cases, needing to put in a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of resiliency to get there. Now, what's going to happen after this is Mercury will leave Scorpio. And we will then have a brief period of time in which Mercury has moved into Sagittarius and then is slowing down, getting ready to station retrograde in Sagittarius around the 9th. That means from October 29th until November 4th, we will no longer have Mercury in Scorpio. We will just have Mars in Scorpio. The key difference with this is that in this previous week, October 22nd to the 29th, the combination of Mars and Mercury carries all of that meaning of Mars I was already speaking about, but it also really brings in a lot of that ability of Mercury to communicate, to find words, to litigate, to be involved in business and financial things and interpreting things, translating things, focusing on perhaps learning, writing, speaking, communication. There's all sorts of themes like that that will get amplified with that combination of Mars and Mercury. Mars and Mercury together brings a lot of extra ingenuity and innovation and analytical ability to really, especially what I'm thinking about here is that long term plan. And with Mars and Mercury together, really cutting through, what's going to work in the long term and thinking long range. This option won't work. This option could work. And seeing the long term future of what can really flow through that path of least resistance with your life. Once we no longer have Mercury in Scorpio and it just becomes Mars in Scorpio over this period from October 29th to November 4th, that more flexible ingenuity, intellectual capacity of Mercury will no longer be involved in this Grand Water Trine. And this might just need to involve a lot more of a force of action and persistence and just sort of pushing through with whatever it is that needs to happen at this time. A little bit less of mercurial planning and analyzing and more just like Mars, getting us to take action, get through it, make it happen. Then what's going to happen is Mars is going to leave Scorpio. And there'll be a couple days where there's not a major planet in Scorpio. But then Venus will enter Scorpio on November 6th. Now, this earlier part of Venus's time in Scorpio that begins on November 6th, she's not going to be very close to Jupiter, Saturn, or Neptune. So there will not be a close trine aspect formed between her with them. But she will be in Scorpio. And so we could say there is a whole sign water trine that's starting up at this time. And so there will be this period of time where Venus is in Scorpio and starting to move through the sign of Scorpio, while Mercury has gone into Sagittarius to station retrograde, and Mars has also moved into Sagittarius. Venus coming into this combination is really going to help, I think, bring our awareness to our alliances, our friendships, our romantic partnerships, all of our relational dynamics, and really making important adjustments there. Venus also brings in that aesthetic, creative ability of design. And so I think there can be a lot of redesign coming in here, how to start harmonizing what's come out of balance. And this is Venus in Scorpio, so she's not in her home sign. In fact, she is in the opposite sign. She's in her inversion of Scorpio because her home sign is Taurus. So she is as far away from her home sign as Taurus as she can be in Scorpio. But the thing about Venus in Scorpio is it's still Venus. It's just Venus in this Scorpio place. And so Venus will be helpful in this kind of long-term strategy, but it also might involve some cutting, letting go in that kind of Scorpio way of, what's no longer working. But Venus coming into this is going to be very helpful. And I think this is especially with now Venus and Jupiter combining into this water trine mixed with Saturn and Neptune. It's really going to enhance our ability to recover and restore and bring these new creative dreams more into reality, or at least get the plans for them a little bit more solidified. There's going to be so much changing. It's going to be a lot of like having to adjust and shift. And keep in mind that in this early part of Venus being in Scorpio, it's going to involve Mercury retrograde. And so there's going to be some kind of process of needing to let go of what's no longer working. This could be a really powerful time to make adjustments and habits and releasing the past to open up to the new desires and dreams that are emerging. Then what's going to happen on November 18th is Mercury will be retrograde and will come back into Scorpio, form a trine with Neptune and Pisces, and start getting close to a trine with Saturn and Jupiter. And now we're going to have Mercury and Venus together in Scorpio. This combination is one of the parts of this water trine period that I am most fascinated by. For this section, for most of it, Mercury will be retrograde, but at the end of this time period, at the end of November, Mercury will be retrograde, but will be likely rising, will be becoming visible, and then will be stationing direct just as Venus is leaving Scorpio and completing the trines with Saturn and Neptune. So, part of what this meaning is going to be for you is going to involve what is the meaning of this upcoming Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius and Scorpio. I'll make another video about that later on. But if we think about Venus and Mercury together, there is a lot of eloquence here, a lot of ability to speak and write, a lot of magical ability, a lot of musical ability. So if you are a writer, if you're a musician, if you are really any kind of artist or work in any type of creative capacity, this can be an incredibly rich creative time period. I would really set aside as much time as you can to really creatively work on your projects, keeping in mind that with Mercury retrograde during most of this time period, it might be a lot of experimenting and working with a process, being in that kind of flow state that allows things to keep flexibly shifting and flowing and transmuting and shape shifting until you kind of figure out, where it really needs to end up going. Then what's going to happen is Mercury going direct. Now, what's also going on with all of this, because we have Venus combining with all of this, is going to be our relationships, as I mentioned. And I think one of the things that could be really powerful in this time period is community and alliances, friendships, collaborators, allies, figuring out more in terms of where are you going, what's the direction of your life, and who is really aligned with you. And as you are putting out more of what you want to create and what you want to do with your life, more people that are aligned with that will likely start coming towards you. There might be a bit of a realization of older relationships as we're having to let go of so much stuff out of our life. There's older friendships, older alliances, older relationships that are not going to be quite as prioritized, and new alliances or older relationships that just now are more resonant and come in stronger as collaborators and people that are going to be part of your life. That's very likely to occur during this time, or at least getting a lot of realizations and something really congealing, coalescing out of a process involving that. Then what happens is Venus will go into Sagittarius. And when Venus leaves Scorpio, it'll be the same time that Mercury has stationed direct, and we will get this final push of Mercury now direct and moving back through Scorpio for the final time and completing this Grand Water Trine. And now it is just Mercury. This to me is going to be all about embodying, integrating, and expressing whatever creative realizations you have gained out of this whole time period. Let Mercury guide your way through whatever that is. Certainly, as I already mentioned, there could be a really powerful learning experience or course of studying or mentorship that you're undergoing across this time period, which by the time we get to the end of this could be really powerful with the realizations you gain. But really, Mercury can be applied to anything. So this could involve business plans that you've been developing. If you're working on a business plan over this time period, I think there'd be a lot of forward movement and clarity gained for that business plan by the end of this process. Or perhaps it's some sort of new investment strategy or business strategy, or it's a writing project or a music project or a creative project of some other sort, whatever it is, this would be the time to make those final realizations and get going with this new sense of creative direction that's going to emerge out of this powerful grand water trine. What makes this last section even more powerful is just before Venus leaves Scorpio, Saturn will station direct at the end of November, and then Neptune will station direct on December 10th, just as Mercury's about to go out of Scorpio. And so we're going to get both Saturn and Neptune stationing direct at the end of November and beginning of December, which just is going to really intensify their presence and the magnitude of them being so close together in Pisces. And that's going to, I think, really bring up some awakenings, realizations. If there is disillusionment coming with that, it will help reorient you to important, deeper truths that you do need to be aware of. And so finally, just to run through some of the dates that are pretty key with this, it'll be around October 24th that we get the first exact trine. This will be when Mercury forms the first trine between Mercury and Jupiter in Scorpio. You can see when this happens, Mars will be very close to doing the same. And then we will get Mars coming into his first exact trine with one of these planets with Jupiter on October 27th. And at this point, Mercury has moved through the trine with Jupiter and Saturn and is coming into the trine with Neptune. So this period here around October 27th is an especially loaded, very powerfully forming water trine where all of these themes I'm going to be talking about are really going to be flowing and coming up. Then, as I mentioned, right before Mars leaves Scorpio, Mars will complete its last exact trine with one of these planets on November 3rd. Just as the moon is waxing towards fullness, you can see Mercury has already moved into Sagittarius at this point and will be starting to slow down to station retrograde. Then on November 11th, this is an important date because this is when Jupiter will station retrograde. So Mercury will have already stationed retrograde a couple days before this and in Sagittarius, and then Jupiter will station retrograde on November 11th. So there's going to be an intensification of the meaning of Jupiter and Cancer coming through here on November 11th, which will be especially powerful because Mercury is stationing at the same time, and they are even forming what's considered to be a contra antitia aspect, which they're actually coming together and interacting in a really powerful, interesting way here when they both station. And at the same time that's happening, the sun is coming into a trine with Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. So this is very, very, very powerful. And this is also at the very beginning of Venus moving through Scorpio. There's going to be a lot of insights coming in here about that Jupiterian vision that is part of this dynamic. Then on November 19th, I wanted to make sure I shared this date because this is going to be this incredibly powerful new moon in Scorpio that happens with Mercury retrograde in Scorpio also part of it. So not only is the moon being reanimated and we're getting this new lunar cycle, we are also entering this death and rebirth and reanimation of Mercury. So Mercury and the moon are combining with the sun in this grand water trine. It will be very interesting to look at the difference. As I mentioned, October 19th to the November 19th, the first month of this grand water trine definitely has one type of shape and things getting really moving forward in some kind of way. Here, there is something coming back, something that needs to be released, needs to be readjusted, but really powerful new ideas. So whatever happens over the course of this first month, we're going to need to reassess here, and we're going to need to be making new intentions and adjusting. But this will be an incredibly rich opportunity to make those adjustments. There's something, though, incredibly revelatory about this new moon because, as you can see here, it's not only forming this grand water trine, but it's also pretty much exactly opposite Uranus and Taurus. So there's very likely to be some big sudden realizations and insights about the path forward. And this is an especially rich time to really do a lot of internal work and searching. Then what will happen a few days later is Venus will form a conjunction with Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. And so Venus will come in, make contact with Mercury just as she is entering into her exact trine aspects with Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. And this will be at the period where Mercury is getting ready to become visible again, starting to emerge out of this retrograde process, starting to slow down to station direct. And so Venus is going to help us recover, get some creative solutions, mend relational dynamics. Very powerful, as I mentioned previously, for any kind of creative exploration that can be happening here at the end of November. And then a few days later, on November 27th, we will have Saturn stationing direct in Pisces for the final time in this Grand Water Trine, with Venus moving away from a trine with Saturn into a trine with Neptune. You can see Saturn and Neptune are only about 4 degrees away from each other. This is going to be a loud exclamation point collectively and personally about the meaning of Saturn in Pisces for you. And it'll probably be a big wake up call and a need to really attend to certain dynamics going on in your life. But with this free flowing water quality, I'm very hopeful about coming up with those ideas and intuitive realizations of what to do next with whatever that might be for you. Then on December 6th, Mercury will be coming back forward direct and will come back into another exact trine aspect with Jupiter. Now, what's interesting about this time is that you can see here Mars in Sagittarius has now moved into forming a square with Saturn and Neptune. And so there's a lot of a big push here now with Mercury direct and moving forward and really getting going with whatever has emerged out of this process. And then at the very end of the process, Neptune will station direct on December 10th, just as Mercury is moving through that final trine. This is incredibly powerful. This is completely such an important time to do that internal work, internal searching your dreams. There's going to be big collective events likely happening here, but really pay attention to that internal life here. And you'll be gaining the final realizations out of this whole grand water process. And honestly, it really couldn't be more powerful than having Neptune stationing direct as Mercury direct is moving into an exact trine with Neptune. Now, I've mentioned taking a course of study would be an excellent strategy over these next few months. And it just happens to be the fact that I will be teaching a course on zodiacal releasing for Kepler College beginning on October 25th. This is a 5-week course, and so it will be flowing through this exact grand water trine period that I have already been talking about. And so I would love it if you would like to join us for this course. We already have a good amount of people enrolled in the course, but there is still space available. So I will put a link below to sign up. If you're not familiar with zodiacal releasing, it is an ancient Time Lord technique. It only really survives textually in a 2nd century text by the Hellenistic astrologer Vedius Valens, who in his text mentioned that this is a potent technique. And it's really proved itself to be incredibly potent because out of all the Time Lord ancient Hellenistic timing techniques that have been resurrected in the past few decades, zodiacal releasing has become one of the most popularly used for good reason, because it is really powerful at giving this narrative, sort of an archetypal narrative structure to your life. And it divides your life up into, you could think about being like chapters of a book or episodes or seasons of the great televised drama of your life. It can be really powerful for reflecting back upon the past, as well as considering where you are now in your story, as well as what could be coming later with the trajectory of your life. This is one of those timing techniques that really pulls you out of the immediacy of just what's happening here and now, and really puts you into a much larger framework of your life story. So it's really powerful just for your own understanding. If you happen to also be a practicing astrologer, this is a very powerful technique to begin working with. You may already be familiar with zodiacal releasing on a lot of the emphasis in recent decades on focusing a lot on peak periods of signs angular to the lot of fortune being activated. I do work that consideration into the course, but I also take into account the rulers of each period being activated as well as the full natal context. And so there's a lot of nuances and added depth to zodiacal releasing that I teach in this course that you don't commonly see talked about in a lot of the more kind of popular, widely spread versions of how zodiacal releasing works. I was very heavily influenced by Demetra George and her approach to zodiacal releasing in my studies with her. And if you're completely unfamiliar with zodiacal releasing as a Time Lord technique, essentially it is showing different signs in your chart as well as the lord of that sign. So you might be in a Sagittarius period on one level, which means, the sign of Sagittarius and its relationship with your chart is a big theme, as well as the planet Jupiter and wherever you have Jupiter. You can read more about the zodiacal releasing technique on my website. I'll put a link below to how to sign up for this course. It begins on October 25th. And I would love to see you there. And as I previously mentioned, my books are open for the end of October as well as November. And so if you would like to talk about the meaning of this Grand Water Trine and the astrology of whatever else might be going on in your life, I would love to work with you and talk to you. So I will put a link below so you can schedule a session, an astrology reading with me. Having astrology consultations is the favorite part of my practice, and I'd love to work with you. So I will put a link to that below. I will also put a link to my Patreon community. I have a very active Patreon community. I put out videos there about the week's astrology every week that don't come up on YouTube. Recently, because I've had a lot of changes going on in my life, you may have noticed that I haven't put out any YouTube videos. But for the people that have been on my Patreon, they have been receiving a video from me each week talking about the astrology for the week ahead. And so you gain access to those weekly videos by signing up on the lower tier of my Patreon, the Alder branch. If you sign up on the middle tier, the Cedar branch, there is a monthly meeting where we get together just after the new moon and talk about the astrology that's happening, as well as things going on in people's lives and any questions they have. There's often certain techniques or topics I cover of special interest in those meetings, and just an opportunity to hang out and learn and talk about astrology. And then if you join the highest tier, the Oak branch, we have monthly classes on specific topics that are much more in depth. And since the beginning of 2023, I have been doing monthly classes on the fixed stars. Coming up next, we will be exploring the Crow star in Corvus Algorab. And so if you'd love to learn about that, please sign up for the Oak tier. You also will gain access to all of the previous classes on fixed stars, which at this point is a very considerable library of fixed star classes. Well, that is it for me. I hope you all can enter this creative, imaginative flow of the Grand Water Trine coming our way and find that path of least resistance into your dreams becoming a reality.